Welcome to another Airbrush Asylum video. This is part 2 of the Eagle tutorial. If you haven't already, then go and check out part 1 where you're going to see how I completed the underpainting and got the artwork up to the stage that you see it in now. I will put a card up on the screen around the top here, as well as a link in the description, so if you haven't, use them to go watch part 1 first before you continue on with this tutorial series. Okay, the colour that I'm using at the moment is sepia. This is Trident airbrush paint, and I've already mixed this colour to my liking with the ratio of reducer that I like to use, which for detailing through my micron is generally about 30% paint and 70% reducer. Most people start with about a 1-to-1 mix with this particular brand of paint. Depending on what paint you are using, just adjust your reducer to your liking. It also depends on how skilled you are with the airbrush. If you're just starting out, then I always recommend to my students to start with a 1-to-1 ratio. That way you can get comfortable with it, and then gradually add more reducer until you're happy with it and you can control it, because once you thin it out more, you drop that pressure down, but there's also the chance that it can spider out on you and blow out because the paint is a lot thinner. It also needs more skill to be able to go over a certain tone or stroke accurately. So running the paint thinner, yes, it does help with reducing the tip drying. However, it makes it more difficult to use if you're not an experienced airbrush artist. So keep that in mind, but like I said, whatever brand you are using and whatever you prefer, mix it to that ratio, and then you can follow along with this step by step. So essentially what I'm doing with the sepia is I am further deepening my shadows, adding in the texture, and just beginning to add loads more detail into this eagle artwork. So this isn't going to be my darkest tone, but I'm treating it that way at this point in time. So I'm utilizing this as if this is the only other color I'm going to use. So add in all your dark tones with this, and then obviously the way I do it is I'll start with the darkest spots and then I'll use that as a guide. So for instance, in the eyeball there, you know that's sepia used at 100% intensity, and then there may be a tone on the reference that is maybe half that strength. So then you would replicate that using your airbrush, only spraying sepia at half that intensity to match up with the reference. And then as you go darker, obviously you don't paint back over everything. So you just add only the darkest spots going forward. So you can see I am adding that texturing in there, building up, as well as dusting over some of my textures, and then working back in. So up nice and close to do those dot textures, and pulling back and forth on that trigger, keeping the air press down all times to reduce my tip drying, and making sure that I am using the airbrush correctly with the double action technique. So you'll notice that I'm using sepia to also build up the feathers. So I'm using sort of not necessarily a defined dagger stroke, but it's in that sort of similar fashion as far as you want to move relatively quickly with the stroke and you're tapering it out. So I kind of control it all in one. And just nice and close where you want that sharper defined edge, and then further back from the surface to get a softer blend. You'll notice that I'll pull out the shapes of those feathers first, and then I will dust my shading on top of it. So that's just the way I like to work. I know some people like to go a bit further away and then sort of almost sketch it lightly in with the airbrush, but I'm relatively confident with it, that I know where I'm going to go with it, so I just up close get those sharper shadows in there first, and then shade out and add that drop shadow for the overlapping of those feathers as well. And just keep referring back to your reference as well, so that you're not just flat toning everything. You want to really start to build shape and add those textures in. But building shape is basically, it just takes time. You've got to render things accurately and just paint what you see. So if you've got a reference, utilize that and paint what you see. It also helps to sometimes block out the rest of the reference. So sometimes I'll instruct my students to get a bit of A4 paper or even a bit of masking tape, mask off, say, a section. Let's say, for argument's sake, you're working on only the eye. Mask that out, focus your energy just on that, and don't get distracted from what's around nearby, because that will also detract your eye. That way you focus on things and you can just paint them. I know a lot of people and a lot of artists that also turn their artwork, their reference upside down, so that can help. And if you're painting a canvas, you can also turn the canvas upside down, and then that way you are really just focusing on the shapes and shadows, and you're not getting tricked by your eye to put in details that aren't there. So if this is the first time watching one of my videos, then welcome. For everyone else, welcome back. Glad to have you watching another one of my tutorials. I do weekly videos here that I hope would help inspire you to grab your airbrush and do some amazing artwork yourself. And if you are enjoying this video, feel free to give it a thumbs up and share it out to anyone that you think might benefit from this particular content. And also, if you haven't already, feel free to hit subscribe, tap on that bell icon. That will notify you every time I put out new content. And in turn, we can continue to build this airbrushing community. So you'll notice I have mixed up a transparent orange. This is orange mixed with transparent base and reducer, all Trident airbrush paint. And you'll see that I've sprayed it on parts of the feathers. Wasn't really that happy with it. It was opaquing a little bit. So I'm just utilizing it in the eye and on some sections of the beak, and then I will come back and tweak some of the other areas. So you'll notice here I have switched my orange to burnt sienna. This is now Createx illustration colors, and I'm using that to get that reddish tone in those feathers, that reddy browny tone, which is very significant to the wedge-tailed eagle. The airbrush that I'm using at present is the Iwata HPCS Eclipse. This one runs a 0.35mm needle. So throughout this series I'm using the Eclipse, the CMC Plus Micron and the CMSB Micron. I'll pop some links in the description below so that if you are interested to check out any of the products that I am using in the videos, you can do so with ease. So you can see that burnt sienna is working really nicely. I'm able to utilize it over a lot of the areas of the eagle's head. Okay, so I am adding some pink now. So this is just white mixed with drops of red and reducer. Again, we're back onto the Trident airbrush paint. I'm just going to create a bit of a flat tone. Now I'm extremely careful now with my overspray, because it's got white in it, it will easily opaque. So just keep your airbrush nice and close and only pull back a little bit on that trigger finger to release small amounts of paint. And as you can see, I am building it up. I'm not trying to saturate the surface or get it all in one stroke, so just build it up nice and even and take your time. Just putting a little bit of pink around some of those eye areas and just some of the spots that I've noticed on the reference that I'm using. Okay, so now I'm switching to white and I'm adding some highlights back over that pink section that I was working on. So you notice that I'm utilizing that white now and I'm bringing back in some of my highlights. I'm also continuing to further detail my texturing. So essentially this is what's creating my layers. Originally in part 1 I added some of these white highlights and textures. I've now worked back over that with my sepia brown and toned it with some burnt sienna. So now, as you can see right here, I'm starting to add more of those fine textures under the eye by just doing that stippling effect again, and that's creating that sense of depth. Alright, so that's how you're going to get it. You're not going to get it by just doing one tone shadows and it's done. You need to do multiple tones. Okay, so even though I've already added a bit of toning to the eye, I'd prefer to brighten it up a little bit, and I'm not happy overall with the entire shape of it. Some of that shadow I find is a bit too heavy, so I'm going to work back over it with the white and then come back and tone back over that and reshadow it, and that'll make it look a lot more impressive than what it is. So with this in mind, you know, when you're doing your own artwork, don't be scared to rework a section. You know, if you need to, if something's not right, rework it. And this is the perfect time to do so. You don't want to do it right at the end. It's a lot easier to fix it. We've still got a darker tone to bring into the mix, so it's not much extra effort to just re-white it. You can notice that I haven't gone a flat tone over it. I've left some of that detail in the eye. That's going to further enhance it. So go back, fix whatever you need to, adjust anything, make sure it's accurate to your reference, and then progress on to the next tone and further on with your artwork. So you notice there's definitely a bit of a mix in exactly the type of highlights and tones that I'm adding. You know, some highlights are from a distance to get a softer sort of highlight, especially on that beak area. And then I'm working in nice and close, obviously, for that stippling, and those real fine strokes are done by working up nice and close and keeping that airbrush moving, paint on, paint off, and essentially just doing a mini dagger stroke in a real fine area. And I'm also working that white back in on the tips of some of these feathers just to re-brighten them, pull out some of those highlights, and then when I do, if needed, tone over them, they're going to have a brighter base set up ready for that. So now I'm going back to transparent orange, and I'm just toning in that eye section as well as carefully spraying it over some of the areas within the beak. Okay, so here we have a couple of images just recapping how we kicked off part 2 of this video. So all of that underpainting that I completed, and now what we're up to in part 2. Now there is a slight little bit of extra dark, so you're getting a sneak peek of what you can expect from part 3 where we complete the artwork. But basically this is what we're up to in part 2. So I do hope that you enjoyed checking out this video tutorial. And until next time, go grab your airbrush, do some amazing artwork yourself, and I'll see you again very, very soon in the next video. Bye for now.